The night the car crash shattered my world was a blur of screeching metal and searing pain. But the real blow landed when my parents chose my brother Caleb's award ceremony over rushing to my hospital bed, a betrayal that cut deeper than the wreckage ever could. I was 29, a carpenter with steady hands, driving home from a late job, when a truck swerved into my lane, my pickup spinning, glass exploding, my leg pinned as the world faded to black. I woke in a sterile room, tubes snaking from my arm, my body a map of bruises, the nurse's voice soft. "We called your family, but hours ticked by, my phone silent, the bed empty beside me, a void where they should have been." I dialed Mom, voice weak. "I'm hurt. I need you." And she hesitated. "Caleb's getting his finance award tonight. We'll come tomorrow." Her words a punch, Dad's murmur in the back. "It's a big deal." Their choice a brick wall, my pain a footnote to his glory, a wound that bled long after the stitches. Caleb was their golden boy, 3 years younger, a slick-talking investor with a penthouse smile, his every win a trophy they polished, while I was the quiet one, the worker, my craft a shadow to his shine. They'd always favored him, Mom framing his diplomas, Dad bragging about his deals, my sawdust-covered life a quiet hum they overlooked. But this, picking his stage over my stretcher, was a line I'd never imagined they'd cross. I lay there, the beeping machines a cruel rhythm, my leg in a cast, my ribs screaming, replaying her voice, tomorrow, as if I was an errand, not a son, their absence a cold truth sinking in. I'd never been their priority, just a backup to his spotlight. The nurse checked in, her pity a sting. "They'll come," she said, but I knew. Their car was parked at his gala, not my ward, a choice that broke something deep, a trust I'd clung to now ash. I pulled through alone, the hospital a haze of meds and metal, my boss calling, "Take your time," friends dropping by, their warmth a balm, but my parents' silence a weight I couldn't shake, their tomorrow stretching to days, a brief visit squeezed between Caleb's parties, Mom's "you're tough," a dismissal, Dad's pat a chore. I rehabbed, my leg a limp, my savings a lifeline, every dollar earned from years of framing. Holmes, Asayi, and his a nest egg I'd guarded, their absence a scar I wore, a fury I buried under the grind. They'd chosen his award, his ego over my blood, a crash they'd ignored, a son they'd sidelined. And I rebuilt, my hands carving a life they'd never touch, never dreaming they'd come crawling back. Their golden boy tarnished, my savings a prize they'd beg for, a refusal I'd wield like a hammer, a justice I'd claim from their ruin. The crash left my leg crooked, and my trust in my parents shattered. But I rebuilt my life from the wreckage they'd ignored, their choice of Caleb's award over my pain a fire that fueled a new beginning, a fortress of my own they'd never breach. I was out of the hospital, hobbling on crutches, my pickup totaled, my savings a lifeline, as I navigated a world that didn't stop for my limp, the carpenter's hands that once framed homes now fumbling, my pride a splinter I'd pull out with every step. Work was gone, my boss apologetic, "Can't keep you on till you're steady." So I leaned on what I had, a small shop in my garage, crafting tables, chairs, anything I could sell. My days a grind of sawdust and sweat, my nights a quiet ache, their absence a ghost I'd banish with every nail I drove. They'd left me, picked his spotlight over my stretcher, and I'd rise, not for them, but for me, a life they'd never claim, a strength they'd never see. I built slow, my leg a dull throb, my savings shrinking, every dollar stretched thin, but steady, a rhythm I carved from the case, my hands finding purpose in wood, my mind in silence. Friends pitched in, old Pete with lumber scraps, Sarah with meals, their kindness a thread I wove into my days, a contrast to Mom's clipped, "You'll manage," when she'd finally called. Dad's gruff, "Caleb's busy," a shrug I'd ignored. I didn't beg, didn't plead, just worked. My shop a sanctuary, the whir of the saw a song, my savings a shield, growing again, a nest egg I'd guard, their choice a scar I'd wear, a fuel I'd burn to stand taller. Caleb's award, his golden moment, was a memory they'd framed, my crash a footnote they'd skipped, and I let it go, my life a plank I'd sand smooth, a future they'd never shape. The duplex I rented became home. its creaky floors a stage for my recovery, my legs strengthening, my hands surer, the shop a heartbeat that kept me alive. I'd sit at night, beer in hand, the city's hum a backdrop, and feel it. A pride so raw it steadied me, a solitude I'd earned, their absence a weight I'd shed, a freedom I'd claimed from their neglect. They'd call, rare and brief, Mom's "How's the leg?" a chore, Dad's "Caleb's killing it," a jab, and I'd nod, fine, my voice flat, their world a bubble I'd popped, my savings a wall they'd never climb. I'd been their shadow, the sun who worked while he shone, and now I was light. My craft aglow, their choice a storm I'd weathered, a life I'd built without their hands, a strength they'd never grasp. Then the whisper started, Caleb's name in hushed tones, a cousin's call. He's in trouble, some fraud thing. And I paused, saw in hand, the air shifting, their golden boy tarnished, a crack in their pride I hadn't sought. Bad investments, she said, cops sniffing around. And I pictured him, slick suit rumpled, his charm fading, Mom and Dad scrambling, my crash a memory they'd buried, now dwarfed by his fall. I didn't gloat, didn't call, just kept carving, my shop a steady pulse, my savings a treasure they'd never touch. Their choice a wound I'd healed, a life I'd forged in their silence. They'd picked his award, left me bleeding, and now he was sinking. A scandal brewing, a storm I'd watch from afar, my refusal a hammer ready to strike, a justice I'd hold when they came begging. Caleb's fraud scandal erupted like a fault line through the family, a jagged crack that shook the pedestal my parents had built for him. Their golden boys fall a storm. I watched from the quiet of my rebuilt life. Their choice to ignore my crash now a bitter echo in his ruin. I was in my shop, sanding a table, the wood smooth under my hands, when my cousin Tara called, her voice tight. It's bad, he's been arrested. Some Ponzi scheme, millions gone. My heart skipped, not from shock, but a cold, sharp clarity. The brother they'd crowned, the one they'd chosen over my hospital bed, now cuffed, his slick smile a mask for lies, their pride a house of cards tumbling fast. Mom's a mess, she said. Dad's raging. They're broke. And I pictured it. Their new condo, Caleb's gift, now a weight, my crash a faded scar, his scandal a fresh wound they couldn't stitch, a justice I hadn't sought but felt deep. The details spilled out, a grim cascade, Tara's words painting it raw. He conned clients, faked returns, lived big while they lost everything. I saw him, penthouse parties, tailored suits, the award they'd ditched me for a trophy of deceit, his charm a net that snared them all. Mom and Dad blind, their faith a rope he'd hung them with. Cops raided his place, she said. Accounts frozen, lawsuits piling. And I leaned against my workbench, the sawdust thick, my leg a dull ache, their world imploding. The sun they'd picked over me, now a fraud, a thief, a shadow of their dreams. I'd rebuilt, my shop a pulse, my savings a shield, their absence after my crash, a scar I'd turned to strength. And now he was falling, dragging them down, a reckoning I'd watch, my silence a wall they'd never pierce. The family buzzed, aunts weeping. Poor Caleb, uncles cursing. How'd he mess up? Their voices a hum. I tuned out, my focus on the wood, my hands steady. Their pity a noise I didn't need. Tara kept me posted. They're selling stuff. The condo's next. He's out on bail. And I imagined it. Mom's tears a flood. Dad's gruff pride dust. Caleb pacing, his golden rain ash, the award they'd chased a hollow prize. My pain a whisper they'd ignored, now drowned by his crash. I'd sit at night, the duplex still, my beer cold, and feel it. A grim satisfaction. Not glee, but a quiet nod. Their choice a boomerang. My crash, a shadow they'd fled. His scandal a spotlight they couldn't dim. I didn't call, didn't gloat, just kept crafting. My life a rhythm they'd never join. My savings a fortress they'd never raid. Then Mom called, her voice a tremor through the line. We need to talk. Caleb's in deep. We're desperate. A plea that hit like a nail. Their golden boys fall a chain around their necks. My crash and memory they'd buried, now dwarfed by his fraud. He's facing jail, she said. We need money, your savings, please. And I froze, the phone cold, her words a claw at my resolve. The parents who'd left me bleeding now begging. Their choice, a wound I'd healed, a scandal they'd sown, a debt they'd dare pin on me. You picked him, I said, voice flat. Over me, in that bed, this is yours. And hung up. Her sob a sound I wouldn't carry. Their ruin a storm I'd watch. My refusal a hammer I'd swing. My savings a line I'd hold. A justice I'd claim from their fall. Mom's desperate call was a crack in the silence I'd built. Her plea for my savings to bail Caleb out of his fraud scandal, a claw at the life I'd carved from their neglect. A demand I met with a refusal as hard as the wood I shaped. Their choice to ignore my crash, now a debt they'd pay alone. I was in my shop, the air thick with sawdust, my hands steady on a chair, when she called again, her voice a fragile thread. Please, we've lost everything. He needs your help. Your money can save him. My grip tightened, her words a flood. The parents who'd picked his award over my hospital bed now groveling. Their golden boy's ruin a weight they'd sling on me. My savings a prize they'd snatch. A betrayal I'd never forgive. You left me, I said, voice cold. Chose his stage over my pain. This is his mess. And she sobbed, we're family. A claim so hollow it burned. Their absence a scar I'd worn, a plea I'd crush, a line I'd draw in the dust of their fall. She kept going, her voice breaking. He's facing years. We can't afford lawyers. Your savings, it's all we have left. And I saw it. Caleb in a cell, his charm gone, mom's tears a river, dad's pride ash, their world a wreck they'd built. My crash a shadow they'd fled, now begging the sun they'd sidelined. I bled alone, sir. I said, you didn't come. I rebuilt alone. This is mine, and hung up. Her wail a sound I let fade, their desperation a tide I wouldn't swim. My shop a fortress, my savings a wall, their choice a wound I'd turn to steel, a scandal they'd face without my blood. Dad tried next, his gruff tone cracked. We're sorry, we need you. But I cut him off. You needed me then, not now. The line dead, their guilt a hum I tuned out. My refusal a hammer, their ruin a storm I'd watch, not join. The family buzzed louder, Tara's call a whisper. They're begging everyone, you're their last shot. And I pictured it. Mom's calls to cousins, dad's slumped shoulders, Caleb's fraud a noose, their condo gone. My crash a memory they'd buried, now dwarfed by his fall. They're broke, she said. He's guilty. They're clinging to you. And I nodded, the saw in my hand a steady pulse, their plea a weight I'd shed, my life a rhythm they'd never touch, my savings a treasure they'd never claim. I'd rebuilt, my leg a limp I'd mastered, my shop aglow, their absence a scar I'd healed, and now they wanted me, the son they'd ignored, to save the son they'd crowned, a twist so bitter it steadied me, a refusal I'd wield like a blade, a justice I'd hold firm. I kept working, the duplex my haven, my hands crafting, my savings growing, a life they'd never pierce. Their desperation a noise I drowned in wood and sweat. Tara said, they're selling scraps, he's done. And I saw it, their world a husk, Caleb's award a lie, my crash a truth they'd dodged, now begging for my gold, a plea I'd deny with every breath. I didn't waver, didn't bend, my shop a steady beat, their choice a storm I'd outlasted, a scandal they'd sown, a debt they'd carry, not me. I slept that night, the air still, my refusal a shield, their ruin a shadow I'd let fall, my savings a line I'd guard, a crash they'd ignored, a victory I'd claim, a family I'd lost to their own hand, a strength they'd never break. Caleb's fraud scandal swallowed my parents whole, their pleas for my savings a desperate echo that faded against the fallout they faced, a wreckage I watched from the steady ground I'd built, their choice to ignore my crash now a chain they couldn't break, my refusal a wall they'd never climb. I was in my shop, staining a table, the wood dark under my hands, when Tara called, her voice a thread of exhaustion. He's convicted, years behind bars, they're done, lost it all. My chest tightened, not with pity, but a cold, fierce clarity. The golden boy they'd picked over me, now a felon, His award a lie, their pride a pile of ash, my hospital bed a memory they'd buried, now dwarfed by his cell. Mom's sick, she said. Dad's a ghost, they're begging still. And I pictured it, their condo sold, their lives a husk, my savings a lifeline they'd claw for, a plea I denied, a justice I'd let unfold. The details piled up, a grim tapestry, Tara's words raw. He took millions, ruined families. They're suing him dry. I saw Caleb, cuffs tight, his charm a sham, mom's tears a flood, dad's gruff voice silenced, their world a ruin they'd built on his shine, my crash a shadow they'd fled, now dwarfed by his fraud. They're living with Aunt Claire, she said. Pennies left. Your name's all they've got. And I leaned on my workbench, the stain wet, my leg a dull ache, their fallout a storm I'd weathered, my shop a pulse, my savings a shield. Their choice a wound I'd turned to steel, a scandal they'd sown, a debt they'd pay alone. I'd rebuilt, my hands steady, my life aglow, their absence a scar I'd healed, and now they were begging, the sun they'd ignored, a rock they'd cling to, a plea I'd let sink. The family fractured, aunts silent, uncles grumbling. Should have seen it. Their voices a hum I ignored, my focus on the wood, my refusal a steady beat, their pity a weight I'd shed. Tara kept me posted. Mom's frail, dad's drinking, they're lost. And I imagined it, their borrowed room a cage, Caleb's cell a mirror, my crash a truth they'd dodged, now begging for my gold, a lifeline I'd guard, a crash they'd overlooked, a fallout they'd face without me. I'd sit at night, the duplex quiet, my beer cold, and feel it, a grim peace, not joy, but a nod, their choice a boomerang, my pain a whisper they'd drowned, his scandal a roar they couldn't mute. I didn't call, didn't bend, just kept crafting, my life a rhythm they'd never touch, my savings a fortress they'd never breach, their ruin a tide I'd watch, not swim. Mom tried once more, her voice a whisper. We're sorry, we need you, he's gone, we've got nothing. A plea that clawed at old wounds. Their golden boys fall a weight they'd pin on me. My crash a memory they'd erased, now begging for my blood. You chose him, I said, voice flat. Left me bleeding, this is yours. And hung up. Her sob a sound I let fade, their desperation a storm I'd outlast, my shop a haven, my savings a line, their absence a scar I'd turn to strength, a scandal they'd built, a debt I'd never pay. I kept working, my hands carving, my life steady, their fallout a shadow I'd let fall, my refusal a hammer, their choice a wound I'd healed, a crash they'd ignored, a victory I'd hold, a family I'd lost to their own hands, a justice I'd claim from their ashes. Caleb's conviction and my parents' collapse left their world in ruins. Their pleas for my savings, a fading whisper I'd silence with refusal, a peace I claimed from the ashes of their choice to ignore my crash, a strength they'd never touch, a victory forged in the life I'd rebuilt. I was in my shop, finishing a chair, the wood warm under my hands, when Tara's last call came, her voice a sigh. They're gone, moved away, Caleb's locked up, it's over. My heart steadied, a calm settling deep. The golden boy they'd crowned now a number. His fraud a chain they'd wear, their condo a memory. My hospital bed a truth they'd fled, now buried under his cell. Mom's broken, she said. Dad's a shell. They've stopped asking. And I pictured it, their borrowed room empty, their pride dust, my savings a prize they'd never claim, a refusal I'd wielded, a justice I'd let burn, a peace I'd earned from their fall. Their end was quiet, a shadow shrinking, Tara's words a final note. They're with cousins, scraping by. He's got years left. I saw Mom, frail, Dad, hollow, Caleb's cell a cold reality. Their world a wreck they'd built on his shine, my crash a scar they'd ignored, now dwarfed by his fraud. They don't talk about you, she said, just him. And I nodded, the sawdust thick, my leg a faint ache. Their fallout a storm I'd outlasted, my shop a pulse, my savings a shield. Their choice a wound I'd turned to steel, a scandal they'd sown, a debt they'd carry alone. I'd rebuilt, my hands steady, my duplex aglow, their absence a ghost I'd banished, and now they were gone. They're begging a hum I'd drowned, my life a rhythm they'd never join, a piece I'd carved from their silence. The family faded, their buzz a whisper, Tara's calls rare. They're done, a truth I let settle, my focus on the wood, my refusal a steady beat. Their ruin a tide I'd watched, not swum. I'd sit at night, the duplex still, my beer cold, and feel it, a peace so deep it steadied me. Their choice a storm I'd weathered, my crash a shadow they'd fled. His scandal a fire they'd lit, now ash I'd walk from. I kept crafting, my shop thriving, my savings growing, a small house bought, brick and quiet, a life they'd never touch. Their absence a scar I'd healed, a strength they'd never grasp, a victory I'd claimed from their fall. They'd picked his award, left me bleeding, and now he was nothing. A fraud they'd banked on, a family I'd lost to their own hands, a peace I'd built in their void. Dad's last call came, a gruff whisper, "We were wrong, we're sorry." A crack in his pride. Their golden boy's ruin a weight they'd carry, my crash a truth they'd face too late, my savings a line I'd held, a plea I'd denied. "You chose," I said, voice firm, "live with it," and hung up. His silence a sound I let fade, their fallout a shadow I'd shed, my shop a haven, my life aglow, their scandal a storm I'd outlasted, a refusal a hammer I'd swung, a justice I'd claimed. I stood taller, my legs steady, my hands sure, their world ash, my peace a dawn, a crash they'd ignored, a victory I'd shaped, a family I'd left to their ruin, a strength they'd never break, a life I'd forged, a quiet I'd keep, a triumph they'd never dim.